Welcome everyone, Costin here to talk about the worst and most useless faction in the entire game. Race, if you will, really, but it's more so the faction. And we're talking about Undivided Chaos. The Daemon Prince, Yuri. Easily one of the worst legendary lords if you're playing him. Pretty decent if you can get a hold of him as another faction. Fair enough, because you can then give him items, and you can actually use his skill tree in a decent enough fashion then. In that situation. But if you're playing him, it is a journey through hell. So, first off, you have no faction benefits outside of the demonic glory, which basically replaces your research tree, meaning you're not going to get research benefits. And then, when it comes to lord benefits, all you get is undivided, really, which customizable gifts. The problem with these customizable gifts is that although there's some great abilities over here, it comes at the cost of being able to put items on your lord, which means that you can't put something like an Armor of Destiny for a lot of ward save, or a powerful weapon, and so on and so forth. And as a result of that, he ends up being fairly weak in battles. And then there's his skill tree. His skill tree is a genuine mess. Now, I may not have leveled him in the best possible fashion over here, but when we're looking at his skill tree, you have to understand most factions, the vast majority of legendary lords, a couple of exceptions here and there, like Ron Brindle, but the vast majority of legendary lords can get something like Root Marcher at level 2. He requires to spend 5 points, so he's really only going to get that at level 6. And then Inspiring Presence, even same idea, though realistically level 12, because you would get Root Marcher first. And not having these from the start is a significant downside from the very beginning. Now, he does have a lot in the skill tree, but a lot of the useful stuff is early on, but you need to dedicate yourself to a particular god. So for instance, hey, you want casualty replenishment? Oh, you need to go with Nurgle. Oh, you want to have income from sacking settlements? Go with Corn. That kind of stuff. The only really useful stuff over here is this one, Respect of the North, which gives you a significant diplomatic relations benefit with Warriors of Chaos, Demons of Chaos, and Beastmen and Norska. Unforgiving Rule, free control local province. I've gotten this to help control. Control actually is going to be a major issue that you're going to be dealing with this particular faction. So yeah, the Lord himself, if you're playing him, is very weak. If you can get him as another faction, different discussion. You can give him items and he can be pretty decent in that kind of situation. And then let's talk a bit about the economy and unit recruitment. Now, I've gained a lot of money in this campaign by getting a cafe and caravan, taking air grants, sacking some settlements, but even then, money is tight. The reason money is very difficult is that structures themselves are very expensive. They're not necessarily more expensive than other factions, but other factions may have a way to reduce it. You really don't have a way to reduce the cost of structures, and your baseline economy is pretty weak. Now, you, by default, get income structure that gives you 100 for regardless of which god you're following. It's going to have a different name, sure, but it's only 100 income at level 1. To increase it to a higher level, it can be quite a bit of money. Though not necessarily as much money as Kislev, but it's basically the same kind of economic benefit, at least early on, as Kislev, though it can go to a higher level at tier 3. But early on, 100 income is pretty pathetic when we're looking at it. Then there's the issue of resource buildings, which won't generate resources because guess what? You can't trade. You can't trade with any faction, so you don't have the ability of gaining money through that. Like, Kislev may have structures that generate very little resources, but they can benefit significantly from resource buildings, and they can trade. So, not having that significant downside. Oh, what about the individual gods that you can follow? Well, the problem is you're going to start here in this tumor with Nurgle. Now, you use Undivided for your public order. Starting in Nurgle heavy area is going to create issues when it comes to your control. And those issues are never going to go away in your campaign, because you can't have undivided structures. You have to dedicate to a particular god, in this case Slaanesh. And that in itself is going to create a lot of public control issues, which I've solved here by giving these kind of control structures, 2 of these control structures. Now, with different gods, you can gain a special building. Each of them has their own special building that will increase your hero capacity for individual heroes, as well as give you, generate you some extra income. So, with Slaanesh in particular, you can gain up to 300 income if you have your control higher than 25. And of course, Slaaneshi Corruption gives you an income benefit of 10%. But even then, at turn 43, this province, which I've invested a lot of money in, is only generating 2,600 at turn 43. Other provinces, yeah, they can start generating a decent amount of income, sure, if you invest money, but you're very, very weak early on, economically speaking, and it's going to take you a long time to get past it. In fact, you're so weak economically that it will take you a significant amount of time to be able to afford more than one army. And we're talking here armies made up of relatively weak units. Though, to be fair, in this case, this army is as expensive as it is because I've gotten these regiments of renown, without which this army would be significantly weaker. Here's the problem with your Lord skill tree. He can reduce by a significant amount the upkeep of Khorne units, but even then, even doing that, the demonic units in general are fairly expensive. Now, one upside when it comes to unit recruitment is that you have access to a lot of regiments of renown, and powerful ones at that, for which you can also reduce the upkeep due to some of the benefits that you get for your lord. So you can have a very, very powerful army, an expensive one, sure, but it's only going to be one army. And therein lies the problem. For a lot of the early game, you're going to be running around. That means less flexibility on the campaign map. That means less opportunities to conquer territory. That means your opponents, the AI opponents, are going to get ahead. Because if you have fewer armies, it means you capture less territory. It means your economy is growing slower. It means your opponents get ahead. And you're just going to fall behind. It's not good enough for a faction to have one good army on the campaign map. It matters a great deal to be able to maintain a lot of armies very quickly. And you're worse than Kislev and the Dwarves, which are already pretty bad in that respect. You're gonna struggle. Like, even if I were to get rid of these regiments of renown, like, I'm only generating a total income of 10,000 by turn 43. Some factions will be generating 50,000, 60,000 by this point. This is why this faction and this lord are so pathetic. Because, yeah, generating half or a third or a quarter or a fifth the income of some other factions is pretty ridiculous. I mean, there are factions that don't trade, but they have ways of getting significant benefits. Like the Greenskins don't trade. No one's gonna mock the Greenskin economy. The Greenskin economy is a powerhouse. A powerhouse that by turn 20, you can maintain 5 armies. 5 armies that would be the same cost as this boy right here, or this boy right here. Well, maybe a bit less, but still. A lot of armies, and that's before we talk about the WoW. So demonic units can be pretty decent, though they're not super powerhouses, but they're very expensive as well to recruit. So there's a lot of downsides. Issues with not having trade, issues with a weak economy. I mean, you can really see that this faction, this lord, was designed for a far more limited campaign, where having one single really powerful army would be very significant. True. But we're not in that. And this guy was already very weak already in Realms of Chaos. It's not like the Daemon Prince was dominating the map in the Realms of Chaos. He was not. He was struggling quite a lot compared to all other factions, more or less. And now he's in a far worse situation than that, because the other factions, with the exception of the other demonic factions, have gotten ahead of him. Like, the problem with the Daemon Prince is that all demonic factions are inherently weak, baseline weak, but the other demonic factions, be it Scarbrand, Nurgle, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, right, Nakari, all that, they all have some ways of getting ahead. With Scarbrand, it's blood hosts. With Nurgle, it's the instant recruitment, of course, and the growth, and all the powerful plagues that he has available. With Slaanesh, it's domination and the economic benefits you can get. Though Slaanesh's economy is still going to be pretty weak overall compared to other factions, but at least you can get some economic benefits working pretty well. And of course, the Cult Army, an army that you can summon using cultists that can be really, really powerful and can turn the tide when you absolutely need it. But when we're looking at the Daemon Prince, the one benefit he does have, the demonic glory, isn't great. You would think that the faction with access to all the demonic units would be incredibly powerful, but it's not. Because it's very difficult to get access to all of that. And then there's the problem of how your economy works compared to how your units work. If you dedicate a province or a region to a particular god, you might think, okay, I'll dedicate it to Slaanesh. Slaanesh can give me the biggest economic benefits through income from buildings, all that. Well, here's the problem with that. Slaanesh units aren't great, nor are siege units, for instance. Now, I dedicated this province to siege because, or rather this one to siege because it already had a lot of siege corruption, so I was like, let's not go with the flow, because removing all that corruption would be a pain in the neck. But siege units aren't the best. Like, the best units are Khorne units, but Khorne doesn't have the economic benefits that you desperately need to get those units. Like, yeah, sure, I've dedicated some provinces to Khorne here in the south, but that was much, much later. So you create issues between recruitment and your economy, because you obviously want to go with Slaanesh, or you want to go with Siege. Like, you want to go with Siege in Siege-heavy areas, because what you need to get the economic benefit from the Conjuring Stones is when the magic is tempestuous. And it won't be necessarily as much as the same kind of economic benefit, or it will be as much as what you're getting from Slaanesh. In fact, it might be easier if you're in a siege-heavy area. Another issue, of course, corruption. The problem with starting here in the Castways in an Nurgle-heavy area when you're using Cast Undivided Corruption is public order, as I've said. You would do far better if you started in an area with Undivided Corruption, like for instance the Mountains of Hell over here, where Trog starts. That would benefit you far, far more. So there can be a lot of issues when it comes to it. In general, Cast factions don't struggle with public order, because they can get, whatever corruption they're using. But the fact that you're using Undivided Corruption for your control, but you're not able to generate Undivided Corruption because you have to dedicate a province or regions to a particular god, creates a lot of problems in your campaign. That's a lot of issues. I think a better system would be, if you're dedicating a province to a particular god, then the way the corruption should work is like, okay, let's say this particular province I've dedicated to Slaanesh, then Slaaneshi corruption should generate control, as opposed to Undivided Corruption, because I'm not going to get Undivided Corruption in this situation. It's just an idea, right? Just a notion, as opposed to tying it to Undivided and screwing you over, because having poor control hurts you in more ways than one. It hurts your growth, and it hurts your recruitment cost, which already, the recruitment cost can be pretty high. You do have ways of reducing it. Yes, you do get pretty decent rights, like you get Nurgle with growth, Slaanesh with control, Khorne with recruitment cost, and local recruit capacity, and Undivided with Undivided Corruption. And Siege, of course, with income from all buildings. Like, you can get plus 15% income, but plus 15% income is still not going to be particularly great, I'll be honest, when you think about what other factions are capable of doing. So it's an issue of not having a particularly good lord, though the army can be good with the regiments of renown, though those obviously are going to be very, very costly. Like, yeah, it's awesome to get the Bloodthirster regiment of renown until you start figuring out that it's going to cost you an arm and a leg, and it's going to cost you an arm and a leg to maintain it as well. But it can be a great deal of power, undeniably so. But you're not going to be able to maintain even all the regiments of renown, unless you're continuously sacking settlements. Though sacking settlements also affects your glory. Another downside in all of this, if you want to unlock, like, say, Bloodthirsters and all that, you need to dedicate to get a lot of glory. Otherwise, you're not going to get those benefits. There are some benefits, of course, for unlocking various thresholds, right? For instance, Nurgle Corruption, all provinces, or if you're unlocking Undivided, you get a lot of weapon parts, various benefits, of course, diplomatic benefits, etc. But even with all those benefits, which take time, even with all of those benefits, you're still playing second fiddle to a lot of other factions. And these benefits, to be quite honest, are not necessarily enough to make up for the loss of not having a research tree. Though, to be fair, 25% income faction-wide from sacking settlements could be pretty useful, but a lot of these benefits just aren't that... a lot of these benefits just aren't really that great when it comes down to it. Some are pretty decent, but they also take a good amount of time to be able to unlock them. So you're a faction that starts slow, takes a very long time to get stronger, and even when you're stronger, you're not as strong as many of your neighbors. I mean, your neighbor over here, you start neighbors with Malice, Darkblade, Boris, Ursus, and Archeon, and to the south you have Trog, Frot, Azazel. All of these, including Boris, are significantly more powerful than you from the very start of their campaign, let alone the scalability. Kislev itself actually has scalability in their economy in the mid to late game, if they get to a tier 4 settlement. Let's not even talk about what Malice can do, or what Archeon can do, or what Trog can do. Wulfric, Frot, far more powerful factions as neighbors. It's not like you have a free start, like for instance over here, if you're playing as either Oxyotl or Kairos, you essentially have a free campaign start because you don't have any major enemies except one. And you can deal with one enemy. Having 4 powerful potential enemies from the very start of your campaign, though the chances of all declaring war on you are fairly low, but having a lot of powerful enemies from the very start is something that's going to drag you down. Another thing I've noticed when I'm playing the Daemon Prince, and this is something I've noticed with other factions, I'm not sure if this is something that Creative Assembly has done or not, but it does feel like Chaos-aligned factions tend to do worse when you're playing as Daemon Prince. Similarly to how Imperial factions tend to do worse if you're playing as Karl Franz. It's just something I've noticed. I mean, look at this campaign, for instance. This is bananas in a lot of ways. Katrin has conquered the Nordland and Ostland, and she's a very strong faction. You almost never see Kislev being so powerful, or if you want to see something that's going to completely blow your mind, Boris Ursus has defeated Archeon. Yeah, Boris Ursus, who generally gets wiped out or fought to a stalemate, managed to wipe out Archeon. It blows away my mind. And I've seen this happen sometimes. I've seen, like, for instance, in a lot of campaigns, right? In a lot of campaigns, Foregrim Grudgebearer tends to do pretty decent against his enemies. But if you're playing a dwarf campaign, for instance, he's going to get wiped out. And if I'm playing as Ungrim or as Belegar, I almost certainly have to go and bail them out. I'm not sure exactly why this is, but it is something that I've noticed. I think it may have to do with some of the benefits the AI is getting, dependent on which faction you're playing. Dependent on which the faction you're playing. What's kind of hilarious, though, is if you're playing a greenskin faction, the same thing will actually happen with Skarsnik taking out Forgrim, which he almost never does in most campaigns. It's just something that I've noticed when I'm playing a lot of campaigns. Like, the way things play out tends to be different depending on who you're playing. Might be something related to bonuses, might not be something related to bonuses, but it does affect you, because if Archeon is weaker, then he might be by default, and if other Chaos factions are weaker, then it might be by default, then you're having an even harsher time than you would normally. That's all there is to say. Costin here, signing out. Don't play this faction, don't play this Legendary Lord. The thing is, he's not completely useless if you do confederate him. Because he can actually work pretty well if you confederate him. And you can give him items. That's a different discussion. But yeah, stay tuned for more.